I had always known that living in an HOA-governed community came with its fair share of drama. In fact, I had spent years watching my neighbors get into petty fights over mailbox colors, lawn heights, and even the number of Christmas decorations they were allowed to put up. But up until recently, I had managed to stay out of it. My property, a large, beautiful piece of land on the edge of the community, had been in my family for generations, long before the HOA was ever formed. It was a place filled with memories. From my childhood summers playing in the vast open space to the countless hours my grandfather had spent tending to the garden that still thrived to this day. The land wasn't just some patch of dirt. It was mine, and it was deeply personal. But apparently Karen, the HOA president and self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, didn't see it that way. It all started with a letter. One crisp autumn morning, I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I noticed a fancy envelope sticking out of my mailbox. The HOA emblem was stamped in gold on the front, and my stomach dropped the moment I saw it. I had never had issues with the HOA before, but I had heard the horror stories. Neighbors fined for leaving their trash cans out an hour too long. Others harassed over minor infractions, like planting the wrong type of shrub in their yard. But surely this had nothing to do with me. Or so I thought. I opened the envelope, and as I read the letter inside, my heart started to pound. The letter, filled with a bunch of legal jargon and HOA regulations, made one thing shockingly clear. They were trying to take my land. According to the letter, my property, my private land, was now considered part of the common area and had been absorbed into the HOA's jurisdiction. I was illegally using what they claimed was community land, and as a result, I had 30 days to remove my fencing and vacate the portion of my property that they deemed now belonged to the HOA. If I refused, I would be fined $500 a day until I complied. I reread the letter 3 times, unable to believe what I was seeing. How could they do this? How could they just claim that my land, which had been in my family for decades, somehow belonged to them now? It didn't make any sense. The HOA had zero jurisdiction over my property. When I had purchased my home, I had made sure that my land was not part of their governance, and everything in my deed backed that up. I wasn't just mad. I was furious. There was only one person responsible for this: Karen. Karen had been the HOA president for years, and from what I had gathered, she loved nothing more than controlling people's lives. She had a reputation for making up rules on the fly, bullying homeowners into submission, and treating the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. And now, she had set her sights on me. I wasn't about to roll over. The first thing I did was march straight to Karen's house. Her place was a monument to her obsessive need for control. Her lawn was trimmed with military precision. Not a single leaf dared to touch her driveway, and her house looked like it had been plucked straight out of a catalog. I knocked hard on her door, ignoring the judgmental stares of a few nosy neighbors who were watching from their windows. When she opened the door, she gave me the fakest smile I'd ever seen. "Oh, hello," she said in a tone so sugary it made my teeth hurt. "What can I do for you?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. I held up the letter. "What the hell is this?" Her smile barely faltered, but I could see a flicker of amusement in her eyes. She knew exactly why I was there. "Oh," she said, tilting her head as if she were confused. "That's just an official notice regarding your land." "My land?" I snapped. "You mean the land I legally own? The land that has been in my family for generations?" Karen let out a fake laugh, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. The HOA has reviewed the community boundaries, and it turns out that your property is actually part of the common area. It's only fair that we make sure all homeowners abide by the rules." I could feel my blood boiling. "You can't just take my land," I said, my voice tight with anger. "That's not how this works." Karen sighed, as if she were dealing with a particularly slow child. "Well, I understand this might be upsetting for you," she said, crossing her arms. "But the board has already made its decision. If you have any complaints, You can bring them up at the next HOA meeting. I clenched my jaw. I wasn't going to waste my time arguing with her on her doorstep. If she wanted me to bring this to the HOA meeting, then I would. And I would make sure that everyone knew exactly what she was trying to pull. A week later, I arrived at the HOA meeting, and it was even worse than I expected. The room was filled with board members and homeowners, most of whom either feared Karen or were loyal to her for reasons I would never understand. As soon as I walked in, I could tell she was expecting me. She greeted me with another one of her fake smiles, then quickly moved the meeting along, conveniently avoiding my issue altogether. I wasn't having it. Before we continue, I said, standing up, I want to address something important. Karen's eyes narrowed. You'll have to wait until the open forum portion of the meeting. I ignored her. I received a letter from the HOA claiming that my property now belongs to the common area. This is completely false and has no legal basis. I want to know exactly who authorized this. A murmur spread through the room. A few people exchanged uneasy glances, but most avoided looking at me altogether. Karen cleared her throat. As I mentioned before, the board has reviewed. Show me the documentation, I interrupted. I want to see the exact clause that gives you the right to steal my land. She glared at me, but flipped open a large binder. According to HOA Regulation 14B, I held up my property deed. This document, which is legally binding, says otherwise. Silence. Karen's smile twitched, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. This meeting is not the place for this kind of discussion, she said quickly. If you'd like, you can submit a formal complaint. I let out a humorless laugh. Oh, don't worry. I plan to do a lot more than that. I could see the cracks forming. She had expected me to roll over, to just accept this theft like so many others before me. But I wasn't like the rest. I was going to fight back. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I walked out of that HOA meeting with my mind racing. My land, my family's land, was under attack, and I wasn't about to let Karen and her power-hungry HOA board steal it from me. That night, I spread every single document I had across my kitchen table. Property deeds, tax records, zoning maps. Everything that proved my land was mine, not the HOA's. The more I read, the angrier I got. The HOA had no legal right to claim my property, but they were banking on intimidation to make me fold. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to expose them. Step 1, lawyer up. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in property disputes and HOA overreach cases. After a few calls, I found someone who had dealt with exactly this kind of situation before, a no-nonsense attorney named Daniel Carter. The moment I explained the situation, he sighed. HOAs pull this kind of nonsense all the time, he said. They're hoping you'll either not know your rights or be too scared to fight back. Well, they picked the wrong person, I said firmly. We scheduled a meeting for the next morning, and I made sure to bring every piece of documentation I had. Daniel went through my property deed, tax records, and even the original HOA founding documents, which clearly outlined the actual community boundaries. Not surprisingly, my land was outside of their jurisdiction. They don't have a legal leg to stand on, Daniel confirmed. They can't just declare your property part of the HOA because it's convenient for them. They need an actual legal agreement signed by you, which, obviously, you never did. So, what's my next step? I asked. First, I'll draft a cease and desist letter, making it crystal clear that they have no right to your land, and that any further attempts to claim it will result in a lawsuit, he said. If they're smart, they'll back off. If not, well, then we'll go to court, and trust me, we'll bury them. Step 2. Expose Karen's lies. While Daniel worked on the legal side of things, I had a different plan. To make sure every single homeowner in the community knew exactly what Karen was trying to pull. If she thought she could quietly steal my land and get away with it, she was dead wrong. First, I started talking to my neighbors. especially the ones who had also been bullied by the HOA. Turns out I wasn't the only one who had been targeted. The Wilsons had been fined $2,000 for installing a garden fence that was too high, even though it matched community guidelines. The Martinez family had been forced to tear down their backyard playset because Karen deemed it unsightly. Mr. Thompson, an elderly veteran, had been harassed over his American flag, which Karen claimed was too large. The more people I talked to, the more it became clear. Karen was on a power trip, so I decided to take things public. I printed flyers detailing my situation, explaining how Karen and the HOA were illegally trying to steal my land. I included copies of my property deed and HOA maps proving they had no jurisdiction. Then, I distributed them door to door and posted them all over the community bulletin boards. But I didn't stop there. I went to the local news. I contacted a reporter from a nearby paper that had covered HOA abuse cases before. When I told them what was happening, they jumped on the story. Within a week, an article was published with a headline, "Local HOA accused of trying to steal private property. Homeowner fights back." Karen must have lost her mind when she saw it, because the very next day, I got an email from the HOA's legal representative demanding that I remove all flyers and cease defaming the HOA. I laughed. They wanted to scare me into silence? Too bad. I was just getting started. Step 3. Escalation and retaliation. When Karen realized I wasn't backing down, she doubled down. Within days, I started getting HOA violation notices for the most ridiculous things. My grass was too long. It wasn't. My driveway had an unauthorized vehicle. It was my registered truck. My fence was non-compliant. It had been there for 10 years with no issue. It was obvious. This was retaliation. But Karen made one critical mistake. She didn't realize I had already filed a formal legal complaint against the HOA. When my lawyer sent the cease and desist letter, Karen ignored it. Big mistake. Daniel followed up with an official lawsuit filing, challenging the HOA's illegal attempt to seize my land. That's when things really started to fall apart for Karen. Step 4. The breaking point. The lawsuit put the entire HOA under legal scrutiny, and that's when we found the smoking gun. Karen had been misusing HOA funds. A routine financial audit, which I requested as part of the lawsuit, revealed that Karen had been funneling community money into projects that conveniently benefited her personally. Thousands of dollars spent on landscaping improvements for her own yard. A mysterious $10,000 expense listed as a community beautification fund that no one had approved. Expensive dinners, spa visits, and hotel stays billed as HOA business meetings. The homeowners who had once blindly supported Karen turned on her instantly. A special HOA meeting was called, and this time, Karen couldn't control the narrative. When confronted, she stammered, made excuses, and tried to shift blame, but it was too late. The final nail in the coffin? My lawsuit was airtight, and Karen knew it. Facing both legal consequences and community outrage, she did the only thing she could. She resigned. But she didn't just step down from the HOA. She put her house up for sale and moved out of the neighborhood. She was gone. Step 5. Victory and rebuilding. With Karen out, the HOA underwent a complete overhaul. A new president was elected, someone who actually cared about the community instead of controlling it. The bogus fines and petty rules were overturned, and the HOA was forced to issue an official apology for their illegal actions. As for me, I won my lawsuit. The court ruled that the HOA had zero claim to my land, and they were ordered to pay all of my legal fees. I kept my land. Karen lost everything. And the HOA? Well, let's just say they never messed with me again. Karen was gone, but the war wasn't over. Not yet. Her resignation had been swift and humiliating. After years of treating the HOA like her personal kingdom, she had been forced out, her reputation in shambles. I thought that with her gone, things would settle down. But if there was one thing I had learned, it was that HOAs didn't go down without a fight. The fallout of Karen's reign. The neighborhood was still reeling from the scandal. The financial records I had uncovered in my lawsuit had exposed years of corruption and fraud. As it turned out, Karen had been running the HOA like a private business, treating community funds as her own piggy bank. But while she had been the face of the corruption, she hadn't been acting alone. A deeper investigation revealed that several other board members had benefited from her shady financial dealings. The treasurer, a smug man named Tom, had approved every questionable transaction without blinking. The vice president, a Karen loyalist named Susan, had received unexplained reimbursement payments totaling thousands of dollars. Even the secretary, a seemingly quiet man named Richard, had signed off on fraudulent contracts for maintenance services that never actually happened. Karen's resignation was only the beginning. With the HOA under legal scrutiny and homeowners demanding answers, the entire board started to fall apart. The state attorney general's office opened an investigation into misuse of funds, and suddenly, the people who had backed Karen started turning on each other. Tom blamed Susan. Susan blamed Richard. Richard tried to play dumb, claiming he had no idea what was happening. It was like watching rats scramble to abandon a sinking ship. The homeowners take back control. With Karen and her cronies on the defensive, the homeowners saw their chance. The scandal had destroyed any remaining faith in the HOA, and people wanted change, real change. A group of us, including some longtime residents who had been victims of Karen's reign, came together to form a coalition to demand a complete restructuring of the HOA. Step 1. Force a vote to dissolve the current board. Under HOA bylaws, a special meeting could be called if at least 30% of homeowners signed a petition. Thanks to my lawsuit and the damning financial records, getting signatures was easy. By the end of the week, we had over 70% of homeowners demanding change. When the emergency meeting was held, the entire board was voted out in less than 15 minutes. Tom? Gone. Susan? Gone. Richard? Gone. For the first time in years, the community was free from Karen's dictatorship. Karen's final attempt to escape consequences. But Karen wasn't done. Even though she had resigned and put her house on the market, she was desperate to escape accountability. She had lawyers. She had connections, and she thought she could just walk away. She was wrong. The legal consequences of her actions were catching up fast. Once the HOA's new leadership took over, they hired forensic accountants to go through every financial document from the past 10 years. And what they found? It was bad. Karen had embezzled over $200,000 in community funds. She had funneled money into beautification projects that didn't exist, taken administrative bonuses that weren't authorized, and used HOA funds to cover personal expenses, including luxury spa treatments, vacations to expensive resorts, shopping sprees at high-end stores, payments on a second home in a different state. Her entire house of cards came crashing down. The lawsuits and criminal charges. The HOA's new board immediately filed a civil lawsuit against Karen, demanding full repayment of the stolen funds. But it didn't stop there. Since she had used community money for personal gain, she had violated state law, which meant criminal charges were now on the table. A few weeks later, Karen was formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, theft by deception. When the news broke, the entire town found out. Karen, once the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, was now a public disgrace. The local news stations picked up the story, and soon her name was everywhere. Even people outside our community knew about the HOA president who had tried to steal land and ended up losing everything. It was delicious. Karen tries to flee and fails. Faced with lawsuits, criminal charges, and a destroyed reputation, Karen panicked. She tried to sell her house as quickly as possible, but there was one major problem. Nobody wanted to buy a house from an ex-HOA president accused of fraud. Her house sat on the market for months, with buyers backing out as soon as they found out who she was. In the end, she had to sell it for a loss, barely breaking even after all the legal fees she was drowning in. And then she vanished. No one knew where she went. Some rumors said she moved in with family in another state. Others claimed she had changed her name. But one thing was certain. Karen was gone, and she wasn't coming back. The end of the HOA's tyranny. With Karen out of the picture, the HOA underwent a complete transformation. The new leadership did something that hadn't happened in years. They actually listened to homeowners. Instead of controlling people's lives, they focus on actual community improvements like fixing neglected roads, reducing HOA fees, eliminating useless rules, and best of all, they officially changed the HOA bylaws to prevent anyone like Karen from ever gaining that kind of power again. No more ridiculous fines. No more petty harassment. No more power-hungry dictators. The community had won. Final victory. My land is mine forever. As for me, my lawsuit was completely successful. The court not only ruled that the HOA had zero claim over my land, but they also ordered them to cover all my legal fees. I made one final change after everything settled down. I expanded my property fence, making it crystal clear that my land was mine and mine alone. And just for fun, I put up a big sign that said, "Private property, no HOA jurisdiction," because after everything Karen had put me through, I wanted to make sure that no future HOA tyrant would ever try to pull this stunt again. The moral of the story? Never back down. Karen thought she could steal my land and get away with it. She ended up losing everything. The HOA thought they could intimidate me into submission. They ended up falling apart. And I stood my ground, because when you fight for what's right, when you refuse to be bullied, intimidated, or controlled, you don't just win. You make sure that tyrants like Karen never rise again. And that's the best revenge of all.